Jack stood in front of the worn-out spaceship console, staring at the screen. His fingers hovered over the controls, hesitating. He'd been a relic hunter for years, traveling across galaxies in search of lost treasures. But this was different. The signal he had picked up was unlike anything he had ever encountered before. It was ancient, faint, but there was no doubt it was there. The signal had been bouncing off the edge of a dead star system, a place forgotten by time. Most people believed there was nothing left in that area, just rocks and empty space. But Jack had heard rumors. Stories of an artifact, a relic so powerful it could change the fate of entire civilizations. Could this signal be the key? Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The signal didn't match any known frequencies. It had a rhythm to it, almost as if it was alive, calling out, and it was getting stronger. With a deep breath, Jack activated the ship's engines. The quiet hum filled the cabin, the ship slowly coming to life. His heart raced. As the engines roared to full power, Jack pushed the ship into hyperdrive, heading straight for the source of the signal. Hours later, Jack's ship emerged from the swirling vortex of the hyperdrive. Ahead, a small planet loomed, its surface covered in dust and craters. Jack could barely make out the outlines of an abandoned alien city through the thick atmosphere. The signal was strongest here. His ship landed with a soft thud. Jack powered down the engines and grabbed his gear. He didn't know what to expect, but his instincts told him to be cautious. Something about this place felt strange, like it was hiding something. Stepping out of the ship, Jack felt the crunch of the dry ground beneath his boots. The city before him was ancient, the buildings cracked and crumbling. But there was something else, something in the air, a feeling that he wasn't alone. Jack's hand rested on the blaster at his side, his eyes scanning the area for any signs of life. The signal was coming from the center of the city, where a tall tower stood, its silhouette barely visible against the dark sky. Jack moved towards it, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The atmosphere felt thick, like the city itself was holding its breath. Waiting. As he approached the tower, the signal grew louder, clearer. It was as if the tower itself was the source. Jack's curiosity grew stronger, but so did his unease. What was it about this place that made his skin crawl? Reaching the base of the tower, Jack noticed strange symbols etched into the stone walls. They were old, older than any language he had ever seen. The symbols glowed faintly, pulsing with energy. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the cool stone. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the air. Jack whipped around, his hand on his blaster. But there was nothing. Only the wind howling through the empty streets. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. It was probably just his imagination. He turned back to the tower, but then he saw something that made his blood run cold. A shadow moved across the stone wall, too fast to be a trick of the light. Jack's eyes widened. Someone or something was out there, watching him. Without thinking, Jack dashed towards the entrance of the tower. His heart was pounding in his chest, and the signal, once faint, was now a constant hum in his ears. He had to find out where it was coming from. He had to know what was hidden inside. The door of the tower creaked open as Jack pushed against it. The air inside was heavy, filled with the scent of ancient dust. The signal was deafening now, coming from deep within the tower. Jack pulled out a flashlight and shone it ahead. The beam of light revealed a long, winding staircase leading down into the darkness. Jack hesitated. Every instinct told him to turn back, but his curiosity pushed him forward. He began to descend, each step echoing in the silence. The deeper he went, the colder it became, and the stronger the signal grew. It was almost as if the tower itself was alive, breathing with him. At the bottom of the stairs, Jack found a large chamber, its walls lined with strange, glowing crystals. In the center of the room was an ancient pedestal, and on it, resting under a protective shield, was the relic. The artifact he had been searching for. It was beautiful, shimmering with an unnatural light. The signal was coming from it, pulsing in time with Jack's heartbeat. He reached out slowly, almost instinctively. But before his fingers could touch the relic, a voice echoed through the chamber. "You shouldn't be here." Jack froze, his heart racing. The voice was deep, cold, and filled with power. He spun around, his blaster in hand, but there was no one there. The voice came again, this time from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Leave now, or you will never leave this place." Jack's breath caught in his throat. The signal, the relic, it wasn't just a treasure. It was a warning. Something had been waiting for centuries, and Jack had just awakened it. He turned to the relic, his mind racing. What had he found? Was it truly a gift, or had he just unleashed something far more dangerous than he could ever imagine? The answer to those questions would have to wait. The real question was, could he make it out of the tower alive? The ship rocked gently as Jack stared at the alien landscape below. His hands gripped the controls, and his mind raced. He had been hunting relics for years, but this mission felt different. It wasn't just about treasure, it was about survival. A few hours ago, Jack had received a strange message from a new ally. An alien named HFY had reached out, claiming to know the location of the artifact Jack had been searching for. At first, Jack had dismissed it as another trap. But the signal was real, and HFY's information seemed to match up. So, here he was, descending into the heart of an uncharted planet, about to meet someone he barely trusted. As Jack's ship landed, a wave of unease washed over him. The planet was silent, too quiet. No signs of life, not even the usual hum of nature. Just dead, empty land stretching for miles. The ship's door opened with a hiss, and Jack stepped out, scanning the barren horizon. His hand instinctively went to his blaster. Something didn't feel right. He was supposed to meet HFY near an old abandoned building. Jack had read the ancient maps. It was a place once used by a long-gone alien species. The relic Jack sought was supposed to be hidden there. But as he walked towards the ruins, his mind kept going back to one question. Who was HFY really? Jack wasn't a fool. He had dealt with enough aliens in his time to know that not all of them could be trusted. HFY had been too eager to help, too quick to offer information. It all seemed too good to be true. The ruins loomed ahead. The crumbling walls and broken windows were nothing new. Many planets had old, forgotten structures like this one. But the closer Jack got, the more he felt like he was being watched. He turned a corner and froze. There, standing in the shadows, was HFY. The alien was tall and lean, with glowing blue skin and strange markings on his face. His eyes, dark and intense, were fixed on Jack. HFY didn't speak right away. He simply stood there, waiting. "Jack," HFY finally said, his voice smooth, but with a hint of something colder beneath. "You've come. I was beginning to think you wouldn't." Jack didn't say anything at first. He studied HFY, trying to read his expression. The alien's smile was thin, almost too perfect. It was a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Jack's instincts told him something was wrong, but he needed HFY's help. There was no turning back now. "I'm here for the relic," Jack said, trying to keep his voice steady. "You said you know where it is." "I do," HFY replied. "Follow me." Without another word, he turned and led Jack through the ruins. The walls seemed to close in as they walked deeper into the darkness. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the sound of their footsteps. Jack's eyes flicked back and forth, his hand never straying too far from his blaster. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being led into something far worse than he realized. They finally reached a door, a large metal entrance covered in strange symbols. HFY pressed his hand against it, and the door slid open with a loud hiss, revealing a large chamber. At the center was a pedestal, and on it, the relic. It was unlike anything Jack had ever seen, glowing with an eerie light, its shape constantly shifting, as if it were alive. Jack stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the relic. But before he could reach it, HFY's voice stopped him. "You should be careful," HFY said softly, his tone almost too calm. "There's more to this relic than you know. It's not just a treasure. It has a power that can change everything." Jack turned to face him. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice cold. "You said you wanted to help me find it." "I do," HFY replied, his eyes darkening. "But you're not the only one who wants it." Before Jack could react, the door slammed shut behind him. He spun around, but it was too late. Aphid's face had changed. The calm expression was gone, replaced by something darker, more dangerous. "You're too late," Aphid said, stepping closer. "This relic isn't for you." It never was. Jack's heart raced as he backed away, his hand tightening on his blaster. "What are you talking about? You lied to me." Aphid laughed, the sound echoing in the chamber. "I never lied. I just didn't tell you the whole truth. I'm not the one who needs the relic. You are. You were always meant to find it." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. The ground beneath his feet began to shake, and the relic on the pedestal glowed brighter, its power pulsing in the air. Suddenly, Jack understood. The relic wasn't just a weapon. It was a key that could unlock something far more dangerous. And Aphid? He wasn't just an ally, he was part of the plan, a part Jack hadn't seen coming. Aphid's smile returned, but now it was a grin of triumph. "You should have stayed away, Jack. You've unleashed something you can't stop." Jack knew he had been played. He had trusted the wrong person, and now it might be too late to stop whatever Aphid had planned. The room began to spin, the energy from the relic filling. Suddenly, Jack understood. The relic wasn't just a weapon. It was a key that could unlock something far more dangerous. And Aphid? He wasn't just an ally, he was part of the plan, a part Jack hadn't seen coming. Aphid's smile returned, but now it was a grin of triumph. "You should have stayed away, Jack. You've unleashed something you can't stop." Jack knew he had been played. He had trusted the wrong person, and now it might be too late to stop whatever Aphid had planned. The room began to spin, the energy from the relic filling the air like a storm. Jack's hand trembled as he raised his blaster, but it wasn't clear if he could fight what was about to come. The real danger had just begun. Jack stood at the edge of the ruined temple, his breath catching in his throat. The wind howled through the ancient stone pillars, whispering secrets from long ago. He had been chasing this relic for months, tracking down every lead, deciphering old maps, and following stories passed down through generations. And now, finally, he had arrived. The relic was said to hold unimaginable power, the kind that could change the fate of entire civilizations. But Jack wasn't sure whether that power was something he wanted to unleash. There were whispers of a curse, a dark force tied to the relic, one that could bring destruction rather than salvation. But Jack had no choice. He had come too far to turn back now. The temple stood before him, its grand entrance covered in thick vines and moss. The once great walls were cracked, but they still held an eerie beauty. Jack pushed the heavy doors open, his eyes narrowing as the dim light from his flashlight flickered across the interior. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the silence was deafening. Jack's footsteps echoed through the vast chamber as he made his way toward the center, where the relic was said to rest. A stone pedestal stood in the middle of the room, bathed in the faint glow of the light from his flashlight. And there, on the pedestal, was the relic, a dark, shimmering object, pulsating with an unnatural energy. Jack hesitated. The stories had warned him. Legends told of explorers who had come for the relic and never returned. Those who had tried to claim it spoke of strange dreams, voices whispering in the dark, and a sense of dread that followed them long after they had left the temple. Some even said the curse followed them, slowly driving them to madness. But Jack pushed those thoughts aside. He had been trained for this. He had faced danger before. He stepped forward, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for the relic. The moment his fingers brushed against the cool surface, the room seemed to shift. The walls groaned, and the ground beneath him trembled. Jack jerked his hand back, his heart racing. He looked around, but there was nothing, just the relic, still glowing faintly on the pedestal. Was it just my imagination? Jack muttered to himself, but deep down, he knew it wasn't. The air felt heavier, thicker, as if something was watching him, waiting. He took a deep breath and moved closer. This time, he wrapped both hands around the relic, lifting it carefully from the pedestal. As he held it, the ground shook again, but this time, it wasn't just the temple. The very earth seemed to tremble, as if something ancient had awoken. Suddenly, the temple doors slammed shut with a loud bang, trapping Jack inside. He spun around, his eyes wide with panic. The air grew colder, and a low growl echoed through the chamber. Jack's breath came out in visible puffs, the temperature dropping rapidly. He didn't have much time. Something was wrong. The relic was more than just a treasure. It was a key to something far more dangerous. Jack sprinted for the door, but it wouldn't budge. He slammed his shoulder against it, but the thick wooden doors were unyielding. The growl grew louder, closer. He spun around, his eyes wide as he scanned the room. Something was moving in the shadows. Something big. "Who's there?" Jack shouted, his voice echoing off the stone walls. But no one answered. A dark figure emerged from the shadows, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. It was a creature unlike anything Jack had ever seen, tall, with long, spindly limbs and a face twisted in a permanent snarl. It was ancient, its skin covered in a thick layer of dust and moss, as if it had been waiting here for centuries. The creature stepped forward, its voice a low hiss. "You should not have taken it." Jack held the relic tightly, his fingers numb from the cold. "I had no choice," he said, his voice shaking. "I had to." The creature laughed, a sound that sent chills down Jack's spine. "The curse has been awakened," it said. "The relic is not meant to be touched. You will never leave this place." Jack's heart raced as he realized the truth. The curse was real. The moment he had taken the relic, he had triggered something far beyond his control. The creature moved closer, its eyes never leaving Jack's. "What do you want?" Jack demanded, his voice rising in panic. "I'll leave. Just let me go." The creature didn't answer. Instead, it reached out with one long, bony hand, brushing past Jack's shoulder. The touch sent a shock of ice through his body, and for a moment, the world around him seemed a blur. He gasped for air, his vision swimming. "You cannot escape the curse," the creature whispered. "The relic chooses its bearer. And now you are bound to it." Jack stumbled backward, the weight of the relic pulling at him, dragging him down. His mind raced. He had to think, had to act. The creature was closing in, its claws extending. With one final burst of strength, Jack raised the relic, holding it above his head. The energy within it surged, glowing brighter than ever before. The ground shook violently as the creature screeched in pain. Jack didn't know what was happening, but he knew one thing: the relic's power was more than he could control. And now, it was all around him. The creature let out a final, deafening roar, its body disintegrating into dust as the light from the relic exploded outward. Jack fell to his knees, his body trembling. The curse had been broken, but at what cost? He looked down at the relic in his hands. It was still glowing, but now it seemed different. Not as dangerous, but still powerful. Jack didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: the curse of the relic was never truly gone. It would always find a way to return. Jack had always trusted her. Layla. She was his closest ally, the one person who had been with him through every dangerous mission, every twist and turn of their galaxy-spanning adventures. They had shared secrets, fought side by side, and built a bond that felt unbreakable. At least, that's what Jack thought. But now, as he stood at the edge of the dark cavern, the truth began to sink in. The relic was gone. And Layla was the one who had taken it. The mission had seemed simple enough: find the ancient artifact hidden deep within the cave system of a forgotten planet. The story spoke of its power, a power so great that it could reshape entire worlds. But Jack hadn't known about the second part of the story. He had noticed something was off when Layla had disappeared just before they reached the final chamber. It had been just for a few minutes, but Jack knew her well enough to sense when something wasn't right. When she returned, she had claimed that she had gone to scout ahead, but Jack didn't believe her. The unease in his gut only grew stronger. Now standing in the cavern, the truth was impossible to ignore. The relic was gone. It had been taken. And Layla was nowhere to be found. Jack cursed under his breath. How could she do this? How could she betray him like this? He had trusted her more than anyone. She was the last person he would have suspected. But here he was, alone, trapped in the darkness of the cave with no way out. The cavern was eerily silent, the only sound the faint drip of water echoing from the deep crevices of the walls. Jack's mind raced as he searched for answers. What had Layla been after? The relic wasn't just a piece of treasure, it was a key to something far more dangerous than either of them could have imagined. The relic had the power to control minds, to bend the will of entire populations. And Layla, of all people, knew exactly what that kind of power could do. She had always been obsessed with control. But Jack had never thought she would go this far. Then it hit him. She wasn't working alone. Someone had helped her. Someone more powerful. Someone who wanted the relic for themselves. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he turned on his communicator. "Layla," he called into the silence, hoping for a response. But there was nothing. Only static. She wasn't answering. He didn't know where she was, but he knew one thing for certain: she was still out there, and she was going to pay for what she had done. He gritted his teeth and pushed forward. The deeper he went into the cavern, the more the walls seemed to close in around him. Every step was a reminder of the betrayal that had just shattered everything he thought he knew. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as Jack ventured further. His thoughts were a mess filled with anger, confusion, and disbelief. How could he have been so blind? How could he have missed the signs? He had spent years fighting beside Layla, and now he was questioning everything. Finally, he reached the inner chamber of the cavern, and there, in the center of the room, he saw the relic, glowing softly in the dim light. But there was something wrong. Something wasn't right. Layla stood next to it, her back to him. She didn't turn when he entered. She didn't even flinch. It was as if she had been waiting for him all along. "Layla," Jack called, his voice tight with emotion. "You betrayed me. You betrayed us." Layla slowly turned to face him, her eyes dark and cold. "I didn't betray you, Jack," she said calmly, almost as if she were explaining something simple. "I did what was necessary." Jack's heart sank as he stepped forward. "What are you talking about? We were supposed to protect it, not steal it. Why would you do this?" She smiled, but it wasn't the warm smile he remembered. It was calculating, empty. "Because power is everything, Jack. You were always too focused on doing the right thing. But sometimes the right thing isn't enough. Sometimes you have to take what you want." Jack's breath caught in his throat. "You're working for someone else, aren't you? Who else is behind this?" Layla didn't answer immediately. She just stood there, staring at him with that cold smile. "You'll find out soon enough," she said. "But by then, it will be too late. You don't understand what this relic can do, Jack. You don't understand how much power it holds. I can change everything. I can make sure we never have to struggle again." Jack's mind was racing. She had always been ambitious, but this was beyond anything he could have imagined. The relic was dangerous, far too dangerous to be controlled by anyone, especially someone like Layla. "Layla, you're making a huge mistake," Jack said, his voice shaking with desperation. "You don't know what you're messing with." But she just laughed softly, almost as if she pitied him. "No, Jack. You're the one who doesn't understand. This is my chance. My only chance." Before Jack could say another word, Layla stepped back, her fingers grazing the relic. The air in the room seemed to thicken, crackling with energy. Jack's eyes widened as the power in the room surged, and he felt a sharp pain in his head. "You're too late," she whispered, just as the room around him went dark. Jack stumbled, the weight of the betrayal crashing down on him. His world went black, and the last thing he heard was Layla's cold, empty laugh echoing through the chamber. The sky was painted in shades of red and black, the storm clouds swirling ominously above the battlefield. Jack stood at the edge of the cliff, staring out at the chaos below. His heart pounded in his chest. This was it. The final battle. The one that would decide the fate of everything. The war had been long, brutal, and unforgiving. Planets had fallen, cities had burned, and countless lives had been lost. And now, the last of the enemy's forces had gathered for one final stand, led by the one person Jack had been hunting for years, Commander Vorn. Vorn was a ruthless leader, a man who had masterminded the destruction of entire civilizations. Jack had spent his entire life fighting against him, and now it all came down to this moment. The battle would either bring peace or plunge the galaxy into eternal darkness. Jack wasn't alone, though. His team stood beside him, their faces grim, their weapons ready. Layla, his most trusted ally, was there, her eyes focused on the enemy's lines. She'd been with him through thick and thin, and now she was just as determined to end this war as he was. "Are you ready?" Layla asked, her voice low but steady. Jack nodded, his hand tightening around his blaster. "I've been ready for this day for a long time." In the distance, the enemy's army advanced, their dark figures marching in unison. The ground beneath Jack's feet seemed to tremble as the two forces prepared for the final clash. Jack took a deep breath. He knew this wouldn't be easy. He knew many would fall before the battle was over. But he also knew this was their only chance. If they didn't win today, the galaxy would never be the same. The darkness would consume everything. "Form up," Jack ordered, his voice carrying over the noise of the storm. "This ends today." The ground erupted with the sound of blasters firing, and the battle began. Jack's team moved forward, charging into the fray. The air was filled with the sound of explosions, the screech of enemy ships overhead, and the cries of soldiers on both sides. Jack didn't have time to think, only to react. His blaster was firing in rapid succession, taking down enemies left and right. Layla was at his side, her own weapon blazing as they fought their way through the chaos. But even as they advanced, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The enemy's forces were too well organized, too determined. It was as if they were expecting them. Jack's instincts told him that Vorn was close, maybe even watching from afar. He pushed the thought aside and focused on the battle. His team had to win. They couldn't afford to lose. The fate of everything depended on it. Then, through the smoke and dust of the battlefield, Jack saw him. Commander Vorn. The man who had been behind the destruction of everything Jack had ever loved. He stood on a raised platform, surrounded by his elite soldiers, his eyes fixed on Jack. His cold smile made Jack's blood run cold. "It's over, Vorn," Jack shouted, his voice carrying across the battlefield. "Surrender now, and I'll make sure your people are spared." Vorn's smile only widened. "You still don't understand, do you, Jack?" His voice was smooth, calm, as if he were speaking to a child. "I've already won." Before Jack could react, Vorn raised his hand and a bright light erupted from the center of his platform. Jack's heart skipped a beat as he realized what was happening. It was a weapon, something far more powerful than anything they had seen before. It was charging up, ready to fire. If it hit, it would destroy everything within miles. "Layla," Jack shouted, turning to her. "We need to stop him now." Layla didn't hesitate. Together, they ran toward Vorn's position, dodging blasts from the enemy soldiers as they fought their way through the battlefield. The closer they got to the platform, the more intense the fighting became. Jack could see the flashes of weapons in the distance, hear the screams of dying soldiers, but all he could focus on was reaching Vorn. He couldn't let him fire that weapon, not when they were so close to victory. But as they neared the platform, a sudden explosion rocked the ground beneath them, throwing them off their feet. Jack struggled to his knees, his vision blurry. The air smelled of smoke and burning metal. Layla was beside him, helping him to his feet. "We have to hurry," she urged, her voice frantic. Jack nodded, his eyes focused on the platform. Vorn was still there, his weapon charging up, ready to fire. Without a word, Jack and Layla sprinted toward the platform, their weapons blazing. They were almost there. Just a few more steps. And then a figure appeared in their path. One of Vorn's elite soldiers, a towering figure in dark armor. He stepped forward, blocking their way, his weapon raised. "You're not getting past me," he growled. Jack's mind raced. He didn't have time for this. But there was no other choice. They had to fight. The soldier lunged forward, swinging his massive weapon at Jack. Jack dodged, rolling to the side. Layla fired, hitting the soldier square in the chest. He fell, but not before raising his weapon one last time. A blast of energy shot out, striking the ground near Jack. The shockwave sent him flying backward, but Layla was already there, pulling him up. "Go!" she shouted, her eyes fierce. "We can't let him win." With a final burst of energy, Jack and Layla charged the platform, reaching Vorn just as his weapon fired. But it was too late. The energy beam shot out, and for a moment, everything went dark. When Jack opened his eyes, the battlefield was quiet. The storm had cleared, and the ground was littered with the remains of the battle. He turned to Layla, his heart pounding. "We did it," he whispered, his voice full of disbelief. But as he looked around, he realized something. The war wasn't over. The final battle had been won, but there was still much to be done. They had a galaxy to rebuild, and together they would make sure it never fell into darkness again.